Good evening and welcome to Normal Island, our second ever live show on Turn Left. Now, last Monday was our first live show and it exceeded our expectations, hitting over 100 views concurrently, with lots of people busy in the comment section. My name is Curtis Daly and I will be your host this evening, and I'm joined by our very special guest, Helena, aka NoJusticeMTG. Helena, how are you doing?
I'm doing very well. It's absolutely a pleasure to be on the show today, Curtis. As a long-time friend of the show, you are both ways, I believe. We've been on camera together plenty of times now. Lovely to be live on your channel for the second time, indeed, that you've been
Yes.
live on Turn Left.
It's very much a milestone, I believe. You know, we started back probably around the same time, and now we're here live, and it's so good to have you on. But let's get into the story. So the first story of the night. Last week, Chingford and Woodford Green Labour candidate Faiza Shaheen was blocked from standing for the upcoming general election. The reason was over a series of tweets, one in which she had liked a post that mentioned the Israel lobby, which included a clip of a Jon Stewart sketch about facing backlash over criticisms of Israel. Faiza found out only an hour before appearing on BBC via email, and this was after Labour had briefed it to the press. Now, it seems that Faiza won't be going down without a fight. She has hinted that she may stand as an independent, and she's been very open about her treatment from the party. This is Faiza tweeting her experience of a canvasser knocking on her door. Wow, the Labour Party just had the gall to knock on my door. And then underneath the original tweet, she posted a picture of the canvasser and said, "Asking me for my vote? What's the actual fuck?" And finally, confirming that the canvasser would have known it was Faiza. To be clear, when you use Labour Party app, you see the names of who lives there. I'm livid. Now, Faiza has faced some backlash for posting the image, some saying that, oh, I had sympathy for her, no more after this, and I question whether they actually had sympathy in the first place. But in the image, you can't see the canvasser's face. It's not like they could be identified. And I also think those sharing it with their outrage, well, they're only amplifying the image too. Now, to me, I think it's wild that we are policing the actions of a victim here. And she's a victim, all right? Faiza was the candidate of 6 years. She's local and has recently given birth with a C-section, might I add, has been treated appallingly by the Labour Party. Yeah, some are concerned trolling her, expecting her to be quiet and to not kick up a fuss. Helena, what are your thoughts? First of all, the entire episode with Faiza Shaheen, but also this backlash from this tweet.
Again, I mean, I think we've all been absolutely and justifiably outraged by the shit that we have seen happen to Faiza Shaheen and indeed many people on the left. There was a really great piece in Novara today, speaking with Michael Crick, talking about the kind of the joy what seemed to be the NEC are taking in engaging in these kind of factional deselections of people in the party, because there's nobody to hold them to account. Again, like all of the processes within the Labour Party to try and make sure that things are democratic, it's all been torn up by the Summer Politburo and all of their little mates from Labour First on the NEC. And so this is just going to be the natural result. And what this has done is actually driven a wedge between the Labour Party and the community in Chingford and Wood Green, who seem outraged by it. It's really interesting looking at that Shamatala, the person who was put in to replace Faiza Shaheen, was only able to gather like an absolute handful, like a real tiny amount of people willing to canvass for her after, well, essentially there's both the CLP and the general community being completely bypassed by the top of the Labour Party. And then you compare that to all the people who poured in their support to her, both in person in the event that was actually organised by people outside of her control within Chingford for her, where she said that she didn't think there was a route back to the Labour Party for her. It's clear from her interview on Politics Joe she might be standing as independent, which I would 100% endorse, as much as I'd like her to be standing for the Green Party, which I think she might have somewhat of an affinity with. I think she'll probably do better standing as an independent, as somebody who's from Chingford, for Chingford. I think that'll probably be the best way of her taking her campaign in my mind moving forward. And then after all of this, all like the meltoids on Twitter go, "Oh, I can't believe you posted a picture of somebody," and when the face wasn't even showing, I'm like, come on, this is Twitter. At the end of the day, like, this is somebody who's rightfully aggrieved at the way they've been treated being further humiliated by the canvassers coming there to try and get her to vote for the party that has so gleefully spurned her. Like, I can't, what these people think, why would they lose sympathy? I mean, it's clear to me they didn't really have any sympathy in the first place. They didn't really understand, like the moral position behind what's happened here and why she would be so outraged at trying to be canvassed to vote for this party in the second place. And on top of that, on top of all of that, I'll tell you who I'm also going to call out in terms of the Meltoids on Twitter, is all the people who are saying, I can't believe she'd stand independent. Does she not have any loyalty to the party? I'm like, well, they showed her no loyalty in return. And B, on top of that, again, this isn't team sports, right? This isn't the World Cup. You don't put on a jersey and then support it because you're from that area. You support a party because it speaks to you on a political level, on an ideological level, on a policy level. And she understands that even though the party is controlled by somebody else, she wanted to run as a Labour candidate to be able to have a voice in directing party policy, in directing national policy. And now she can't do that within the Labour Party because all of those mechanisms have been destroyed by the Starmer Politburo. And on top of that, she now can't do it from the Parliamentary Labour Party because she's had that opportunity taken away from her by the people on the NEC. So if she actually really wants to affect the change that she clearly wants to do, she'll have to run as independent. And it just shows you the people that actually care. Like the Liberals, they don't care about policy, they don't care about democracy, they don't care about people having a fair go. They just care about the red team being good and the blue team being bad. And that's as far as their political analysis goes.
Mm-hmm. Well, I want to pick up on the fact that you said about the cruelty and nastiness. And this is what I've always seen, that the mainstream media like to look at the factions and think, oh, it's an equal war. You know, you've got the left faction, you've got the right faction. But something that is, to me, so sinister is not how ruthless the Labour right are, but they enjoy what they're doing. I mean, think of all the briefings to the press about Diane Abbott and the humiliation that comes with it. So I feel like there is, I mean, would you agree with there's some sort of culture intrinsic that move between the circles of the Labour right? There must be some culture issue here.
You're 100%, 100%. We all saw Laura Kuenssberg speaking today on the newscast on the BBC saying, well, as soon as Jeremy Corbyn got elected Labour leader in 2015, we were people on the text to me saying, well, we're outraged. We're going to have to take it all apart piece by piece. And I was like, maybe that might have been worth reporting on at the time. But unfortunately, factional battles in the Labour Party are only interesting if they're being fought against the right, indeed not against the left. Not that a factional battle was fought against the right, because this kind of Stalinist deselection never happened when Corbyn was in charge of the party, despite all of the media people pretending that it was going to happen, but it never materialized. There was a really great story a journalist tweeted out today talking about how the Labour right was so desperate to be vindictive against their rivals. They essentially cost themselves the leadership in the election in 2015 by playing these games behind the scenes with Andy Burnham to try and get him to agree to vote down the welfare bill, to then performatively oppose the welfare bill when it was being voted on when Harriet Harman was the interim leader of the Labour Party. And it turned out that all they did was push their potential candidate to be able to stop Jeremy Corbyn away from being the person who would win over the membership, because it turned out only Corbyn was the person opposing the absolutely rancid benefits bill when it was being passed through the Commons. And this was literally the Labour right, because they were so obsessed with looking performatively cruel that they scuppered their own chances of being in control of the party. And that is essentially one of the reasons why we're in the position that we're in today, with the 2016 to 2019 period being this kind of unspeakable period of Labour history. And we're only in this position because that's who the Labour right will brief around what's happening inside the Labour Party at the time. It's really kind of deliberately nasty, real kind of like playground politics with no concern for the future of the country, or indeed the future of how policy might interact with people of this country.
It's very interesting that you brought up that clip from Laura Kuenssberg, because, I mean, I agree. I can't believe she even came out and said it. And for those that didn't see the clip, it was Laura Kuenssberg pretty much saying, well, I spoke to a Labour figure on the right, and they were absolutely livid that Jeremy Corbyn had won the leadership. And I, for a long time, thought that the figures in the mainstream media overlooked the way the right treated the left, because they move in the same circles as the Labour right. They're more sympathetic to them. But actually, to me, they're well aware of the factional attacks on the left, but they just don't care. And that's very striking to me. Very interesting as well what you said about 2015. Now, I mean, I think in my mind, Jeremy Corbyn would have always won that election, but it would have been far closer probably if Andy Burnham was allowed to be the candidate he wanted to be. And I think when Keir Starmer winning the election this time shows that. I mean, the media want to paint the membership as one thing, which is hard left, but actually the membership were very pragmatic, and they would have voted for Andy Burnham because he was the most left-wing, but also he looked like he could win an election. They voted for Keir Starmer this time around because he was Corbyn with a suit. A lot of people who weren't even that radically left-wing, weren't even that on board with Jeremy Corbyn's agenda, kind of were pushed towards him because they saw three basically flat candidates and one person sounding different. And I think that's where actually you got a lot of people who supported Jeremy Corbyn who ended up coming away being very regretful that they supported him. And they may have not have voted for him in the first place had they had, like you said, none of these tricks from the Labour right that actually undermined Burnham's leadership. That's a very important thing you brought up there. And it's very eye-opening. But we will
I think
go
I
on to our
disagree.
go
Thing,
ahead,
sorry,
sure.
is that I think that I wouldn't say that people were disappointed in voting for Jeremy Corbyn afterwards, because we saw him absolutely destroy Owen Smith when there came time for people to register their displeasure at the second leadership election, which never materialised. But I think that the story really here is that once you allow left-wing voices to have a say, they win people over. Like our policies and our platform are things that people buy into, and I don't necessarily think Corbyn himself was bought into, as much as it seems to be seen to be a cult figure. But it was the policy platform that everybody was sold on before. That's why it was so easy to build them to defeat Owen Smith. And again, it's why Keir Starmer won the leadership election. He promised the same policies. Like, the membership aren't just the cult of Magic Grandpa, as the Liberals on Twitter seem to believe that they are. Well, they actually were people who just wanted good policies, and that's why they supported Keir Starmer when he said he wanted to do them. And it's why people like us are absolutely livid. We're completely furious at the blatant and clear, deliberate lies by Starmer and his campaign team to try and hoodwink the membership to vote for them, to then expel us afterwards as well. It's disgusting. It really is.
I mean, I suppose I'll probably slightly rephrase myself. When I said a lot of people were disappointed, I think the point I was trying to make is that the media painted essentially everybody who voted for Jeremy Corbyn really hard left, Corbynista, in a cult, but actually members had their own agency. They knew what they wanted, which is the policies. And I guess there were some people who were disappointed maybe over Brexit, for example. That was it. But it was a signal to me that they weren't going to give their unwavering support to Jeremy Corbyn, because obviously the media are now trying to sort of say there's this cabal of Corbynites. They were in the Labour Party and now they're going to the Green Party, for example. That's kind of what I mean by that. But you are absolutely right. That the very popular economic agenda of Corbynism, if you want to call it that, is absolutely the main focal point here, and it's why Keir Starmer was so successful. But I do want to move on, and it's not a complete breakaway from Labour. We are still sticking with them. But it's about Luke Akehurst. Now, Labour announced their candidate for Durham, and that is, as I said, Luke Akehurst, who currently lives in Oxford. He is a member of the Labour Right faction. He was parachuted in. Durham is around 250 miles away from where he currently resides. Now, Luke is an extremely controversial candidate. Upon finding out the news that he was to be announced as a candidate, he deleted over 1,000 tweets, which of course is a very normal thing to do and not the actions of someone who has something to hide. Now, this is Twitter. You can delete all you want, but people will have backups or screenshots. Now, this is Luke supporting the illegal land grab of Palestine. Personal opinions, not those of We Believe in Israel. I'm in favour of the major West Bank settlement blocks becoming part of Israel and a new Palestinian state getting compensatory land swaps from pre-1967 Israeli territory. I want the Golan Heights to remain part of Israel. This is just him casually saying that we could use Trident on a city because why not? Trident could be used anything from one warhead in an uninhibited area as a warning shot to 40 aimed at cities. Now, this is a man who shouldn't be anywhere near power, yet he is pretty much guaranteed to be a Labour MP. And that is a truly scary thought. And finally, Luke tweeted his views about the UN. Always bemused by people whose primary political cause is abolition of the world's only Jewish state, getting affronted at the suggestion they might be a bit anti-Semitic. He is then asked, "Do you think the UN is anti-Semitic, Luke?" His response, yes. Now, that was a very brief rundown of who Luke Akehurst is. It was also until recently he was the director of We Believe in Israel, a lobby group on behalf of the state of Israel. Now, Luke quite literally is a paid agent of a foreign nation. That is all more heinous when you realise that Faiza Shaheen, who was pro-Palestinian, was deselected, yet extremely pro-Israel Luke Akehurst is allowed in, especially during Israel's war crimes and genocide. It really speaks, I think, to the current state of the Labour Party. Now, his campaign launch didn't exactly go to plan. Protesters interrupted the event, angry at his extremely toxic positions and that he was forced in with no democratic mandate. We have some footage of what happened. There was a scuffle and even a racist comment from none other than Luke Akehurst's wife.
Fascist imposter. Your politics belong at the BNP, mate. Palestina.
Yours belong in Iran, but we're not shouting about that.
Palestina.
We belong in Iran. Are you looking at the fucking brown people when you say that?
Labour Party, racist party.
And said you belong in Iran.
There we go. That's the racist first.
Now, Labour could be setting out their agenda, yet they've made themselves the centre of multiple controversies, which are entirely self-inflicted. Helena, what is going on? I mean, this seems like the complete opposite of what Starmer describes as high-quality candidates, yet it doesn't seem that Labour will stop Luke from standing, despite his views and the controversy surrounding him. So I want to get your response to all of this.
I mean, what's interesting with the line about high-quality candidates is that is just a canard. Like, that's all it is. All it is there is a way of trying to impress upon people that what constitutes a quality candidate is what part of the Overton window that they sit in. That is what is perceived to be a quote-unquote quality candidate. And you see liberal types repeating this over and over and over again because they just essentially follow whatever their chosen politicians tell them to be the case. Oh, well, we can't have people in the party like Faiza Shaheen and Lloyd Russell-Moyle because we're trying to ensure we have the best quality candidates. Ian Dunt is one of those people talking about the talent on the new Labour front bench or the new Labour benches. I'm like, what, Luke Akehurst is talent apparently now? Really and truly, like, these people are just completely credulous morons, people like Ian Dunt. But again, they've been taught that what constitutes being a quality candidate isn't a connection to a community, isn't a lifetime of service, isn't being part of like a blue collar community, for example. Like, for all of her faults, at least Angela Rayner came up through the trade unions and lived life as a carer. A bunch of these parachuted in candidates are just people who've worked in think tanks that have close relationships with the Labour right. It's totally corrupt, really and truly. And when it comes to people like Akehurst, he's there because the NEC, which he is a sitting member of, gets to appoint the candidates. They're just sitting around appointing each other. It's ridiculous. It's I fundamentally believe it's a corrupt process, and Faiza Shaheen said as much on LBC talking to Lewis Goodall around these kind of things. And local members are absolutely frustrated by it. They're clearly outraged by the fact that they're having candidates imposed on them against the wishes of their CLP, especially people like Luke Akehurst, who have reams and reams of ridiculous things that they've said, like the United Nations is anti-Semitic, or what Jews are politically black. I think is another crazy thing that he said, for example. Correct me if I'm wrong. People, he's finally getting scrutiny after basically only being like a meme person on Twitter, for now actually having his views scrutinized nationally. There's been articles written about him in things like the Metro paper for things he said and done. And it just shows you how popular he is within the community he's being parachuted into, because people had to walk away from his canvassing event with handfuls of canvassing material that nobody wanted to use because they didn't have enough people to want to use it. Shows you how popular he is in North Durham.
It's very interesting because, look, we've been doing our own political content for years now, and even just random people on Twitter can have better investigative journalism than our mainstream media. I mean, yes, so a lot of the controversy surrounding Luke Akehurst are coming out now, which I'm glad to see, but it's only now pretty much when it's too late because he's already a candidate. But for us, for years, I mean, you and I were saying about, this is Luke Akehurst, he's a dangerous candidate. And it feels too little too late. So again, I'm glad that there's articles surrounding him about the UN being anti-Semitic and Jews are politically black. I mean, whatever that even means, it's clearly racist, but what? But thank you for doing that now. But we've been doing this for years, and now he is pretty much going to be in Parliament because it's an incredibly safe seat. What's also quite surprising for me, and I'm not surprised that Luke Akehurst initially became a candidate. I'm not surprised about the corruption. I'm not surprised that Keir Starmer is pretty much stitching up Labour to be a right-wing MP fest. What's surprising to me is that he's always wanted to look, Starmer that is, a man of law, an upstanding citizen, and the UN plays exactly into that. So I'm really surprised that he hasn't done anything about Luke Akehurst, that since the comment about the UN being anti-Semitic is one of his most famous ones. What do you think about that?
I mean, we were speaking about this on Novara today with Michael Crick specifically, and saying that, well, Starmer's just kind of, because he's so politically naive, so politically green. I mean, he only got parachuted into a seat in 2015 so he could be Ed Miliband's potential attorney general should he win the election. He's not a political heavyweight, and he's being, he's having his strings pulled behind the scenes by the people from Labour together. He subcontracts out doing the dirty work behind the scenes to other people who he has implicit trust in. I don't think Keir Starmer gets off on factional nonsense. I think when he was speaking to Jamie Driscoll in 2020 and saying, I don't think we need to get over this factional war and try and bring the party together, I don't think he was being insincere when he was saying this. I just think that he's so trusting of people like Morgan McSweeney behind the scenes, people like the people who are rigging all of the selection contests behind the scenes, and is so kind of politically stupid about these things that he's just going, well, Morgan is saying that it's the right thing to do, so it must be because he ran my leadership campaign. And he's just sitting there completely impotent, pretending to be like a political actor when he's really, as Matt Saab cousin eloquently put it on Twitter, like a kid in one of those little kind of back and forth cars you get outside of supermarkets where you put the pound coin in and it moves back and forth, sitting there turning the wheel, but really and truly somebody else is doing all of the driving.
Yeah, I mean, I probably agree with that assessment. Most people of Keir Starmer would say he's, some may say he's very competent, but he's dangerous. I don't think he is. People think that he is very factional because that's what he believes in. I think I'm more persuaded by your argument, which is that some of the things he said back in 2020, he may have believed it. And even when talking about Jamie Driscoll and not being embroiled in factions, he may have believed it, but he is a vacuum. He's a non-entity, really, isn't he? That's what he is. That's why you can't really pin him down on many things. And there's so many contradicting statements. Yes, he's a flip-flopper. Yes, he's a liar. But ultimately, there's nothing he believes in. And I guess if he were to be someone who was more hardcore in his beliefs, you're probably able to pin him down even better. And I think when people compare him to Tony Blair, and I've always said he's nothing like Tony Blair. Tony Blair didn't need to sideline the left, didn't need to purge them, because Blair knew his project. He was competent and he was confident. Keir Starmer is the opposite. He is someone who isn't confident. He doesn't have anything. And yes, the real driver behind Keir Starmer is Morgan McSweeney, which, again, the media don't seem to talk about enough, but he's a shadowy figure, not to be conspiratorial, but he's, as you said before many times, follow the money and you'll find him. Now, I do want to go through...
One thing as well, sorry, before we move on from this, which is that when you look at Blair, for example, this comparison specifically, at least Blair was sincere in the platform that he ran on when he tried to get elected leader.
Yeah,
he wanted to move on from John Smith's positions on being one last push on light social liberalism. And he said, no, we're turning into a Thatcherite party. I will win the election on this platform. Vote for me. And people voted him in on that regard. Starmer, the complete opposite. Again, complete intellectual and ideological void. Sienna Rogers from Labour List pointed this out during the leadership election on Novara Media. From her discussions with Keir Starmer during that leadership campaign, she was explicit before he'd even been elected as saying, this man believes in nothing. He'll just do whatever it takes and say whatever it takes because somebody else is running his leadership campaign. But really and truly, this man actually has no ideology that he believes in whatsoever. And she called it out live on Novara Media's Tisky Sour ages ago, before all of this had even happened. So you know what? Fair play to Sienna. She's always got her finger on the pulse.
Indeed. What do you think that means for Keir Starmer government then? We can point back to Tony Benn. Like you said, he had a political project he believed in, and I guess he, in some ways, very successfully enacted that. But a Keir Starmer-led Labour government, who is, again, a vacuum figure, what is that going to look like? Is this going to be, I don't know, a 5-year Starmer term? Is he even going to make it 5 years? I don't know. Political predictions are never good, but I'd love to see your insight on this.
So I think that it will only be a 5-year term unless things just magically get better, unless economic growth just kind of comes out of nowhere. Like, I really do truly think he'll be a 5-year prime minister, or maybe even get couped before time. He's Bill who will have had his usefulness to the Labour right, and they'll replace him with a proper ideologue like Streeting or Reeves to be the person who isn't an empty suit being guided by somebody else, but a collaborator in a political project of right-wing politics. I think that's something that we could be looking at because, of course, their support base is broad but shallow. They've got support amongst Liberals who are bought in because they want to get the Tories out, and people who are disgusted by the Conservative government and are looking for anything else and are regretting their vote in 2019 and seeing the shit show and going, well, literally anything must be better, even if it's a serial liar who believes in nothing, who I don't find particularly competent or interesting. At least he's not Rishi Sunak, and at least he tries to pander to the things that we believe. That's what I think is the likelihood to happen when he's in government. Whilst the idea of what he will be like when he is in power, it's going to be exactly what we're seeing at the moment. All the decisions being done by somebody else. We saw this specifically in Sue Gray's plan for changing the way government works. Rather than having cabinet ministers sitting around doing their individual jobs, they're going to create these mission boards, which multiple different teams from different parts of the cabinet work together towards a central mission, which I don't necessarily disagree with. But all these mission boards are reporting back to Starmer, Reeves, McFadden and Rayner. And McFadden is part of that internal faction within the Labour Party that's helping Keir Starmer make his decisions as well. So what's going to happen is these are all going to be subcontracted out to the think tanks like Labour Together, the think tanks like the Tony Blair Institute and the Resolution Foundation, the people who've been allowed to set Labour policy in lieu of the membership and in lieu of the trade unions, as we've seen at the National Policy Forum and things like that. So we're going to be having government subcontract out to think tanks, which is what the Liberals say they hate about the Conservative Party. They hate that the IEA is setting policy through Liz Truss. They hate the Policy Exchange is setting policy through Rishi Sunak and getting positions to talk about these things on the media. Oh, but when it's a think tank which is right-wing, but it's called Labour Together, or it's got Mr. War Criminal Tony Blair in charge of it, doesn't matter he's paid by the Saudi Arabian government, suddenly they ignore it. They ignore it, just like they ignore Ed Balls and Ed Kay Garraway interviewing other Labour politicians on the morning show on ITV, because they don't have principles. They have get the Tories out, they have blue team bad, red team good, and that's where their analysis ends.
Precisely. And I think what we've seen potentially over the last couple of years is there's no floor of support anymore. And I think you touched upon the base of the Labour Party. But I think if you look at both political parties, I think in 2010, and I think I was reading the same article as you. In 2010, it should have been a lot worse for Labour, but the North and Scotland saved them because they still had some base there. But right now, because Keir Starmer is looking at his base and expanding, he's completely ignoring them, going to Middle England. And I think he can be elected very quickly, but he can be kicked out very quickly because I don't see any base there anymore. And that just shows between both political parties. I mean, you've seen the Conservatives who are collapsed. They've obviously lost a lot of their core support. They've gone elsewhere to reform. I don't think there's a real core support for the Labour Party either, and that's in a way quite worrying. We've moved on from ideology, so it's I think that's where we're headed.
Fukuyama was right.
Fukuyama was right. Whilst we're biting our nails when we say that, but before we move on to our next story, I do want to say we have 110 concurrent viewers. This is actually beating last week. And again, I just want to say thank you to everybody. This is only our second ever live show. I'm still learning. I'm still trying to learn the ropes. And I think it's gone incredibly well so far. And please leave comments, even if they're good or bad. Take the mick at my hair because I've got a bit of blonde in it. Whatever it is, we want your engagement. We want your comments. Now, we've got some super chats, which I will read out. James Holmes has gifted 5 memberships. I'm going to try and read this. Stu Viking President is a new member. I also want to read out MZ0. I know you were here last week. Thank you so much for the £10. Venusian Teapot is a new member, and Specs Bean Farmer is also a new member. Thank you. This means so much, and I'm ecstatic and surprised about how much support we're getting. But it means a lot. Now, if you do enjoy what we're doing, I think it's important to point out this is still all voluntary. We have multiple people working on these shows. We have a producer in the background who is doing a stellar job, by the way. Of course, myself and others who will be and have been hosting until the election. And importantly, our amazing guests. So we would really appreciate that you hit the subscribe button if you haven't already. Please make sure that you share our content online. Share it with friends. Share it with family. Anyone, frankly. And if you can support us on Patreon for £3 or £5 per month. Now, the goal is to become a fully funded media organization where people can dedicate their time to turn left with a wage. So your support is very much needed. Now, let's get on to our next story. Immigration. Of course, this has been the number one issue pretty much my entire life, and this election is no different. Keir Starmer has come up with strong words promising to reduce the levels of immigration in our country. With his latest election offer, Sir Keir is encroaching on traditional Tory territory. He told The Sun on Sunday, "Read my lips. I will bring immigration numbers down. If you trust me with the keys to number 10, I will make this promise. I will control our borders and make sure British businesses are helped to hire Brits first." He added, "This is a changed Labour Party, back in the service of working people." That means not just talking about sky-high migration, but acting on it. He said the 685,000 migration number is the second highest on record, and it's got to come down. "I'm not going to duck the challenge." Labour would bar bosses who break employment law, for example, by failing to pay workers the minimum wage or flouting health and safety rules from hiring foreigners, the newspaper reported. Now, the Conservatives, they've changed their minimum salary of 38,700 in order to qualify for a skills worker visa. They've increased it. If you're a social worker, you can no longer bring dependents over. Now, in order to be sponsored, the wage threshold has increased from 18,600 to 29,000. Now, Labour has spoken more about bad bosses exploiting cheap labour, about training up those already in the country, whereas the Tories seem to be focusing on stricter visas. But one thing we can say is that both parties will have a far stricter immigration policy. Helena, is there a real difference between Labour and the Tories' policy on immigration? And is it wrong that Labour are taking a tough stance, even if it's only in rhetoric? Or do you think they don't have a choice?
I think that it's a combination of both. So I do think in general that the immigration plans of both parties are pretty similar now across the board, really and truly, outside of the more progressive parties, outside of the main ones. But when it comes to why they're doing this, I do believe generally that they would lose a bunch of their support in post-industrial Britain if they took a pro-immigration platform. I think that it's bad. I think that they, in terms of whether the policy is good or not, I absolutely think that they shouldn't do it. But I fully understand why they're doing it, and I really don't think they have any other choice other than to try and pander to these narratives, because it's all over the TV, it's all over the media. I mean, if they try and set a different narrative, it's really difficult to push back on something that's been a really inbuilt part of the UK's political zeitgeist for a very, very long time. Ever since immigration massively increased under Tony Blair, it's never gone away from political discussion. So I understand why they're doing it. I'm not usually one to give credence to what the Labour Party is doing. You know me, but I really think that I would want to critique the policy on its utility rather than whether or not I think it's politically viable, because I really think that broadly they probably have to do this if they want to be able to win over enough people to have a large majority. In terms of the policy, whether I think that it's good, or not, the issue, of course, is that one of the main reasons why people don't want immigration in this country is that they think that, as you say, it underpowers workers in the labour market, and B, they think that it's going to put too much pressure on public services and our welfare state to be able to continue. It's really important. This is really important. Neither of these things are necessarily true. Immigration, if it's specifically in like one certain sector, can dilute labour markets, but broadly it usually doesn't, because the increase in consumptive power of the consumptive power of the population will increase as more people come in, therefore creating more demand, therefore creating more jobs to fill that demand. So it's all proportional to how big the population is. And B, you can protect these specific jobs that might worry about immigration diluting the labour pool through collective bargaining agreements very specifically. So you can protect workers' wages even whilst having immigration in a certain sector. The big problem that we have in this country is that the welfare state is really large. Not because people are on benefits, because we have a lot of retired people. We have a lot of old people in this country. The population pyramid is massively skewed and top heavy, and a glut of baby boomers are going to be retiring soon. The productive base of our country is going to shrink because there are fewer millennials than there are baby boomers. And suddenly, with a productive capacity of the economy going down, we're going to have to increase taxation on those who are productive to pay for a massive glut of unproductive pensioners. Now, it's fine. It's good that we have good pensions in this country. But if we want to have productive capacity and a tax base to support a large amount of retired, we're going to need to increase immigration, we're going to need to increase the birth rate, and we're going to have to tax the rich. And then, of course, we cannot fund the NHS, we cannot fund the welfare state if there are not taxpayers to pay for it. Pensioners are not those people. And if we have too many pensioners and not enough workers, it will break apart our country. And so immigration is a necessary evil. Even if people who culturally don't like it, it will ruin the economy if we don't do it.
I think I agree with your assessment that Labour are kind of forced to do this. From my point of view, and obviously this is Labour aren't offering this, but even under Jeremy Corbyn, he did talk about, freedom of movement will end if we leave the EU. And I think, to me, if I'm offered a radical social democratic program, but, controls of immigration, I take that. And it's not my politics. I don't want to blame austerity on immigration. I do want to try and make the positive case for immigration, but I understand a social democratic party where the Conservatives are being outflanked by Reform Party, and one of their main things is immigration. I think I understand the political nous is to do that. But obviously the main thing is supporting unions and not making sure that exploitative bosses aren't undercutting people's wages. But here's the thing. They want to reduce the number of immigration. You're absolutely right. You can't really do that because I think, what was it? 2 years ago, immigration had increased by about 100,000. But when you've got politicians talking about, well, we want to bring it down to levels of £200,000 a year. And I think what people haven't mentioned is that to drastically reduce the numbers, our economic system has to change. I mean, over the years, we've moved to a more global capitalist system. And obviously that means movement of capital, but also people. It's the case that both Labour and the Tories are being dishonest, right? I mean, if they truly wanted to bring down immigration drastically, free market global capitalism can't stay. I mean, would you agree with that statement?
Oh, 100%, 100% right. I mean, labour markets are global. It's why people have worried so much about the power of immigrants to potentially be a reserve army of labour driving down wages. Now, I've given my reasons why I think that that analysis is misguided in broad terms of the economy, but even on a sectoral basis, the neoliberal economy of the way we set wages, it entirely being decided by market forces rather than, say, how they do it in Scandinavia, where you have consortia of trade unions doing sectoral bargaining across entire sectors with employers, creating a wage floor to ensure that even if there is an additional amount of people coming into the labour market pool, you protect those wages. But our politicians don't want to do that. Our politicians want to keep us in this free market neoliberal model, which allows there to be bad bosses allowing to weaponize these things. And again, that's why I think that Corbyn probably was right to talk about like the ending of free movement, but the protection of workers as the kind of main thing that they were pushing there, whilst also ensuring that we treat refugees and asylum seekers with a great deal amount of care and that we don't close our shores for people who want to build a life here as well. Even Boris Johnson recognized that this was a good thing. It was Boris Johnson that relaxed the student visa requirements so we could have a big glut of students, which is a large proportion of the 700,000 people who came here in terms of net migration. To say we want people to build a life here, to take their skills here, to bring their foreign capital here. And of course, that's something I think is a good thing. Some of these people will leave, some of these people will stay here, but they will fill labour gaps. We currently have a labour shortfall in this country. We need nurses, we need carers, we need fruit pickers, we need so many different things we have labour gaps for. So I think that the labour rhetoric that they're using of saying we want to bring down immigration, but in these certain key industries where we're really missing people, we should be recruiting wherever we can find them to fill these gaps. I think it's smart politics. I may not agree, but I think it's smart politics. I just think the bit they get wrong is in the healthcare sector where Starmer has said we need to be training up more people at home. And I'm like, there's no one to train. Unemployment is close to record lows. It's only slightly higher than it was a record low since the 70s a couple of years ago. Unemployment is really low. There's not this huge, untapped resource of people who don't have jobs, who you could train up to be professionals in these particular industries for us to draw upon. That's not a thing that we can do. And I think it is dishonest to the electorate to pretend that that's available, even though I do agree broadly that we need to be investing money in skills training, getting young people ready to be to contribute to their communities through whichever role they might take in the economy. I think having those opportunities available to people through investment, great, fantastic. But don't try and market it as being this way of fulfilling labour gaps that we don't have the available population to be able to fulfill.
Yeah, and I agree. There's a dishonesty at play here, because one thing I would like to say, and I understand, again, I kind of understand why Labour are taking this line, but it feels like still to me that they are appealing to the cultural misgivings when it comes to immigration rather than the economic side. And I know they'll say stuff like, yes, we need to train up our own, which you've already identified there's no one to train up. But I wish people would, apart from you and I, maybe even Labour would say, look, the fact that we have high levels of immigration is no coincidence that we become more integrated. And actually, if we had a more of a social democratic model, more investment in our country, built things here, then maybe we don't have to rely on high levels of immigration. Of course, you're not going to get the Conservatives to say that, or even Reform, who say they're going to be hardline on immigration, because they're free marketeers. But I wish I saw that more in the mainstream. But that requires quite a thoughtful analysis, which is currently missing from our political parties. We've actually had 2 more super chats in, so I will read them out. Now, MZN0, you keep leaving a comment, and I don't want to butcher your name, so please let me know if I'm actually saying your name right. But Curtis, well done, amazing job getting Helena on. Get Ash on next. Well, yes, I mean, Helena is obviously a fantastic guest. I don't know if Ash is going to come on or not, but never say never. And our second comment from Mandy Smith: can't believe this is only the second live stream. Slick, more please. Well, thank you so much. I mean, I've noticed I've probably made a few mistakes here and there, but we're only going to get better. But let's go on to our final story. Nigel Farage has now become the leader of Reform and is going to attempt to become an MP for the 7th time, making the emergency announcement this afternoon. Farage confirmed that he'll be running as a candidate in Clacton. Now, Clacton is ex-Tory turned UKIP MP Douglas Carswell's former seat and a stronghold of right-wing Daily Mail readers. Polling by Survation, published in the New Statesman, shows that Farage would win and will beat the Conservative incumbent by 10%, largely based on name recognition. Now, as you can see, Nigel Farage is way ahead, and according to this poll, would comfortably win as a Reform candidate. Now, we have a clip of Richard Tice and Nigel Farage making the announcement.
What I'd really like is to invite Nigel to be leader of Reform UK. And to my absolute delight, he accepted. And so that's what the plan is. And that's why I'm delighted to welcome my very good friend, Nigel, to the stage to take us forward from here.
Thus far, it is the dullest, most boring election campaign we have ever seen in our lives. And it's funny because the more the 2 big party leaders try to be different, the more they actually sound the same. The election is over. It's done. Labour have won the election. There is not a contest. There is a big MRP poll coming out on Sky News at 5 o'clock that will confirm all the things that we've seen before. I've been nonplussed by Rishi calling a short-term election. Doesn't give me the time to fight a constituency. Doesn't give me the time to build up data. I thought the rational thing to do was not to stand. So I have decided I've changed my mind. It's allowed, you know. It's not always a sign of weakness. It could potentially be a sign of strength. So I am going to stand in this election. I'll be launching my candidacy at midday tomorrow in the Essex seaside town of Clacton. I've made a far bigger decision than that, which is, and I've talked to Richard and he is happy about it. Richard is more than happy for me to put my head and shoulders firmly over the parapet and take the flak. So I'm coming back as leader of Reform UK, but not just for this election campaign. I'm coming back for the next 5 years.
My suspicion is that Farage saw this poll and maybe other internal polling thought, you know what, this is my chance to finally become an MP. It's worth noting that Reform isn't a proper political party. It's a limited company where Farage is the biggest shareholder. So essentially, I mean, did Richard Tice willingly stand down, or did Farage just say, it's my party, I'll lead it? Helena, what do you make of this? How impactful on national politics do you think it would be if Farage wins a seat with Reform?
It's the end of the Conservative Party. I'm calling it. I called it earlier and I'll call it right now. I actually called it 2 months ago. If the polls didn't narrow and the Tories stayed as far behind as they are, Nigel Farage, as the Reform UK clearly is his political project. It's why he has this money in it. It's why he is the sole or the majority shareholder in the PLC, which is Reform UK, for example. It's his project to be able to destroy the Conservative Party. And he was waiting. He was waiting for the opportune moment to see, well, are Labour going to destroy the Conservatives? Are they going to be really destroyed? Or are they just going to be like a small loss? And as the polls never tightened and the Tories still look like they're going to get annihilated, Nigel Farage knew, this is the time that I strike. This is where I go and say, look, we are the new Conservative Party. People who believe in conservatism, who believe in social conservatism, who believe in free markets and free market ideology and privatization, all of these different things. This is the party for you. The Conservatives have betrayed you in what they've done to this country. Now is the time to vote for me. But he can't do that until he knows. He knows for sure there's no route for the Conservative Party back into power, for him to usurp them internally. So this is why he's running. This is why he's chosen now. He can now say to the Conservative base, we are the true opposition. We are the true opposition. He even said in his speech that the Tories don't really oppose properly. I disagree, of course, but I can understand from his perspective why he thinks that, from his very right-wing perspective, that the Tories and Labour seem very similar. I think they're similar because I think they're all both very right-wing. But of course, Farage would see it differently. This is the way in which he tries to control the conversation, not just as somebody who has the privilege of being invited onto media with no reason just because he's a large figure, but he actually will have a democratic justification, a democratic mandate for being included in the national conversation. Shift the Overton window rightwards. Be able to build a platform for Reform UK to truly challenge the Conservative base and to make sure that his brand, his personal brand, but also himself, to become the face of conservatism in this country. And as I said earlier as well, they are clearly buying into the dissatisfaction with Westminster political parties. And of course, if Starmer potentially fails, as we all think that he will, Farage is going to be there to pick up the pieces, and we need to be there to provide the proper alternative when he does.
That's interesting. I mean, yes, of course, people like Farage, people like Tice have said that Labour and the Tories are two sides of the same socialist coin. Of course, that's what they're going to do. They're going to try and say the Conservatives are a left-wing party, which is obviously crazy, but that's their pitch. Here's a kind of a thought I just had then, though. What if Nigel Farage does understand that Labour are quite right-wing, and that's why he's striking now? I mean, he said multiple times that I don't think much is going to change under a Starmer government. He said it might be a little bit worse, actually. So maybe he's actually smarter than that, and he knows that Labour are a neoliberal party, and he's thinking, well, I don't feel that worried about a Labour government. Because if it was
100%.
a Jeremy Corbyn-led Labour government, I think he'd be like, oh, actually, maybe I don't want to risk turning into a communist state, as he would probably think. But given that where Labour are, maybe he's like, actually, they are neoliberal. I want to strike now because at the moment, when they're in government, it's going to be fine. Nothing too bad's going to happen. And then that's my time to strike, essentially.
Yeah, I mean, you should listen to the words he says when he thinks that left-wingers aren't listening. So he was being interviewed by Concrete Mike on Talk TV, and he explicitly said, well, actually, no, Keir Starmer's not that different to the Conservative Party, really. Nothing's really going to change, for example. And yet, when you look at what he did in 2019, when he was so scared of a Corbyn administration, that he deliberately tried to play kingmaker by not running against the Conservative Party to try and stop him getting into government. It should be clear to everybody, if Nigel Farage is not worried about what a Labour Party is going to do in government, the Labour Party is too right-wing. This should be a really kind of like simple heuristic for anybody to be able to intuit whether or not the Labour Party is doing anything to fundamentally change this country. Because if it was doing actual change and it pushed Nigel Farage further away from being the representative of the ideological base of the nation, he would be there trying to kneecap them. But he's not doing that. Ask yourself why.
And yeah, of course, when Farage, because he seeks to be the official opposition, maybe he doesn't, Reform won't get more seats than the Conservative Party, but in terms of the political landscape and the narrative behind it, he may be the opposition. The left obviously have to be the other opposition from Labour. But what worries me is that the Labour have such control over the party. How much influence do we have? I guess for us, it's the external influence. But I think those in control of the party, when Starmer's prime minister, they're going to be so stubborn that they won't conceive to really good economic left-wing policies to offset the rise of Farage. And actually, they're going to help him become even more popular. That's what I see anyway.
100%. I 100% agree with you. And this is why, like, Farage knows you don't have to win seats. You don't have to have, like, legislative power in the House of Commons. All you need to do is have a supporter base that demands people court their vote. That's what he did in the run up to the Brexit vote. He said, we are going to not vote for you unless you support a referendum on leaving the European Union. Brexit happened, UKIP support instantly goes. He managed to push the Conservative Party right wing by offering electoral consequences by splitting the right wing vote and saying, well, tough. This is our single issue we want you to focus on. You're not doing it, so we won't vote for you. Super, super simple as an electoral tactic. And we need to mirror it. We need to mirror this on the left. The latest YouGov MRP poll for this current election has the Greens in second place in 46 seats. That's a huge number of seats. The vast majority of these are Labour stronghold seats. And of course, that's where the kind of people with reform were attacking Conservatives in Conservative stronghold seats, like, for example, Clacton, which was, I believe, Douglas Carswell's seat, when UKIP actually had a member of parliament after he defected. And of course, you have to vote tactically for whoever's best seated to defeat the Tory is only a reasonable strategy if the next election is the last election ever. If we want to be able to create an alternative to the Labour Party, and I believe it should be through the Green Party, I know people disagree for a huge numbers of reasons, but I fundamentally believe that the internal democracy of the Greens, the eco-socialist faction of the Greens, has plenty of buy-in for people who have sympathy with the Corbyn project. Caroline Lucas herself said she was glad that Jeremy Corbyn was singing from the same hymn sheet as what she'd been singing from her time in Parliament. There's clear ideological unity between people on the Corbynite left and those who are in the Green Party currently, at least within the eco-socialist faction of the Greens, that we'll be able to win those over. And the more votes we get in Labour strongholds, the more votes we win over in seats that should normally go to Labour but been disenfranchised because of terrible foreign policy, because of the economic neoliberalism, because of like failures on social policy that we really have buy-in with. That's a springboard to challenge them in those seats further down the line. The Greens didn't win Brighton Pavilion out of nowhere. They canvassed. They made an effort. They bought votes. They brought people in. They won council seats all the way leading up until Caroline Lucas became an MP. And this is how the Reform Party is going to attack the Sunak camp. And this is how we should be attacking Starmer as well. Regardless of whether or not we have proportional representation or first past the post, there is always utility in ensuring that we undermine Labour's dictatorial control with their terrible policy that will leave the left nowhere.
Very well put. I don't think I could disagree with much of that. Now, after the announcement, Farage took a Q&A with journalists. One question was from the Mirror, and they tried a little gotcha with him. Let's take a look.
I'm coming. Don't worry, I won't forget over here. No, I won't.
Sophie Huskinson from the Mirror. So you've announced you're standing for MP to become MP for Clacton.
Yes.
This is despite you previously having said, and I quote, "Do I want to spend every Friday for the next 5 years in Clacton?"
That's right.
What's changed your mind on Clacton?
That's right. You're absolutely right. It's a massive. You're absolutely right. It's a huge commitment. It is a huge commitment. I said earlier, in answer to the question there from LBC, I said earlier that actually working at GB News is the best job I've ever had. I haven't had to travel up and down the country. I was 21 years an MEP. You know, I know what it's like to travel around constituencies, to meet people. It's a huge effort. And part of that weighing up factor was absolutely the question you asked. Am I prepared to give the time, not just to politics, but to a constituency as well? And the demands of a parliamentary constituency are greater, even though they're smaller, than the demands of an MEP constituency, necessarily. You know, surgeries, meeting people, all of those things. You are absolutely right. I'm making a massive potential commitment, if I win that seat, to this and to those people. Thank you for the question.
Now, that was a nice little save from Farage there. I mean, he'd be caught out red-handed, but he's a good talker, and I thought he did well. I mean, do you agree with that, Helena? Was this a pie-in-the-face moment on a big announcement?
I think that he handled it pretty well. I mean, he's always been kind of erudite at handling his rhetoric to be able to back down questions. It's why he's been such a successful politician for so long. It's clear he knows how to be able to convince people and win people over. And we've seen this. I think that's a very good representation of the way in which he can talk himself out of a load of situations where he finds himself and try to be trapped into a little bit of a corner. And I think he will have buy-in from a lot of voters as well because of that, just because he's a bit of a straight talker, really and truly. I hate to make this comparison because they're obviously fundamentally different people in different areas of the world with different politics. But it reminds me a lot of Mick Lynch. It reminds me a lot of the kind of rhetoric around, well, I don't really care what you think. I don't really care what you have to say to me, what your perception of me is. I have one job and one job only. I'm here to be able to put that to people, and I don't care that you want to gotcha me, you want to get me. I will treat you with the disdain that you deserve, for example, for trying to engage in something petty, and I will go back to my main message. I will go back to my no-nonsense approach to politics. Again, I hate to make this comparison because Mick Lynch is a fantastic individual, and Nigel Farage is someone I absolutely fucking hate. But there is something to be said about a gap in our politics for straight talkers who have a singular message that they want to see being represented. And of course, all the rest of the political parties who want to have ins with the lobby media, for example, you can see that they never talk straight. They never are able to try and worm their way around things, and they will avoid questions. They will avoid scrutiny. And people like Farage, they can give a shit about that. And again, I think that's a tactic that we also need to mirror here on the left.
I agree. And actually, you brought up Mick Lynch, and I think it's a fair comparison because he gives that no-nonsense style. I mean, I was watching a clip of him the other day, and he was talking about making the positive case for immigration. You know, he's if you look at him and you didn't hear what he said, you probably think he would be quite reactionary on immigration. But he's there saying we shouldn't be blaming your issues on migrants. And he says, I'm not a wishy-washy liberal. It's just the facts. And the way he communicates, you're exactly right, is I don't care what the media think. This is what I'm going to say. But I also think it says something about how poorly equipped our mainstream journalists are, because I think in her mind that was a really good gotcha and he batted it away straight away. I would love to see far better talented people in the mainstream commentariat. And you also mentioned the lobby media. I'm glad you said that because I have it on kind of good authority that they were speaking to a Guardian journalist and they said, why are you so easy on Keir Starmer? And they said, honestly, access. They just came out and said it. They know he's going to win, and they know rightly that they're not holding him up to accountability, but they want that access. So I think that's a good point to make there. We've got 2 more super chats. Thank you. And I'm going to read them out for you now. It is pronounced Zeno, just to be pedantic. Big love. Kiss, and that's another £10. Thank you very much. And another one from Lewis with a £5 super chat. Love to see my 2 fave lefty streamers collabing. Hopefully both your channels will grow as we build a left alternative under Starmer. My thoughts exactly, and again, thank you so much. Now, that is all for tonight. I want to thank everyone who tuned into our second ever live show. I hope you enjoyed it. I'd also like to thank Helena for joining me tonight, and you can and should subscribe to our YouTube. If you go to youtube.com/NoJusticeMTG, the link is in the description. If you also use Twitch, she's on there too with the same name. You can catch us here this Thursday at the same time of 7:30 p.m. I'm Curtis Daly. Thank you, and see you next time.